Okay, before we get into it today, I've got a buddy right here, right below, right off camera, and he is hot. So if you hear panting, this is Thor. Uh, he's just cooling down. All right, so one of the most common questions that I'm asked is, I actually have interstitial cystitis. So will the UTI Freedom Formula, is it right for me? Is it going to help me? And the answer to that question is yes. So here's what I have come to believe. This is based on my own experience. This is based on the women that I've helped and their experience. Interstitial cystitis and chronic UTI are one and the same. So essentially, like the path that plays out for women with chronic UTIs is typically one of two scenarios. The first scenario is at some point, your standard urine cultures will come back negative. And at that point, you fall down the path of chasing embedded infection. This is microinfection, embedded infection. That's the two most common terms for it. This is where you send your urine off to a special lab and they run PCR on it. This is polymerase chain reaction on it to amplify the bacteria that are there. And in the process, they find these microinfections that are supposedly the reason why they're not detected by standard urine culture is because those bacteria don't grow as well under standard urine culture conditions, or though you aren't shedding enough of those bacteria because of what's going on within your bladder. And what's going on within your bladder, like by this theory, is that these bacteria have built scaffolding for themselves and are hiding in fibrogenic tissue that they've built on the bladder walls, or just your bladder itself because of the extensive scarring that's going on from having chronic UTI for so long, and for the bladder being inflamed and irritated for so long. You've got scar tissue within the bladder, once again, fibrogenic tissue within the bladder, and these bacteria are able to reside within that scar tissue and avoid detection by standard urine culture. So that's like way one. Okay, and then way two is at some point the doctors kind of throw up their hands. They're like, well, your standard urine cultures are coming back negative. So let's get you over to your urologist, order a cytoscopy, and this is where they stick a scope up into your bladder and they look around, and inevitably what they find is scar tissue. So then you're diagnosed with interstitial cystitis. And interstitial cystitis, yes, there's like 3 or 4 criteria that you fall into typically for a solid diagnosis of interstitial cystitis. At the end of the day, it is a catch-all for we don't know what the hell is wrong with you, why you're suffering from these chronic UTI symptoms, and so we think it's interstitial cystitis. Now, interstitial cystitis itself, there's believed to be an autoimmune component, which goes hand in hand with the fact that your cortisol is completely out. So anytime there is cortisol dysregulation in the body, and this is where your cortisol levels are high when they should be low, low when they should be high, always low, like anything where cortisol is not following the healthy daily pattern and especially low cortisol levels are linked with autoimmune conditions. It has been shown over and over and over again that when you supplement cortisol into people with autoimmune conditions, that you are able to actually get rid of the symptoms and actually make significant changes to particular markers on their autoimmune scoring, or like in their autoimmune blood test. This is demonstrated with rheumatoid arthritis. This is demonstrated with hyperinsulinemia. So this is basically where it's called reactive hypoglycemia, kind of where your pancreas releases too large of a bolus of insulin after a meal and you wind up with cratering blood sugar. This is demonstrated in migraine, like things that aren't even, autoimmune. This is demonstrated with Chronic fatigue is another big one. There's actually a thyroid component typically with the chronic fatigue, and especially fibromyalgia. Yeah, so it all comes back to cortisol. And so, yes, your cortisol, if you are suffering from chronic UTIs, if you are suffering from interstitial cystitis, yes, your cortisol is out of whack. And this is throwing your insulin out of whack. And whether you believe it or not, because you might be like, hey, but my doctor says my insulin values are fine. My doctor says my blood sugar is fine. My doctor says there's no ketones in urine. Just because a lab test comes back fine, maybe that test isn't sensitive enough, because I can tell you right now, all my lab work was normal and I was suffering from chronic UTIs, and it was due to insulin resistance. And I definitely had dysregulated cortisol. I am still struggling with the aftermath of cortisol because it's kind of the easiest hormone to go out of whack. It takes a lot of other hormones with it, and it's one of the hardest to kind of restore. That doesn't mean that I am not so much better than I was. I am completely UTI symptom free at this point. I have been for years now. And yes, this is going to help you whether or not you have interstitial cystitis or chronic UTI. Regardless of the diagnosis, if you are suffering symptoms of urinary urgency, burning while peeing, cloudy pee, smelly urine, like pee that just doesn't smell right, UTI Freedom Formula is for you. Now, here's the thing. I understand that it takes a lot to believe that 14 daily email is enough to break what you've got going on, because interstitial cystitis is miserable. I mean, this is a disease that people, a disease as in dis-ease, as in a symptom that people live with chronically for years. There's very little treatment options available. The treatment options that are available are freaking invasive. And not only that, but they offer minimal relief, in that they're short duration relief and typically not 100% relief. Like, it's miserable. It's a miserable condition. I know this because I've talked with lots of women who have actually been diagnosed with interstitial cystitis. I feel their pain. I know that kind of frustration and that kind of, quite frankly, feeling of hopelessness. And I know where it leads a lot of women. Like, a lot of women seriously are on the cusp of considering suicide just simply because they've got this constant need to pee. That sucks. Okay. So, let me collect myself. I got a lot more emotional than I was expecting to on that. Um, there was something that I wanted to say about that. Yeah, so the treatment options are great. A lot of times it will involve what's known as an instillation. This is where you kind of have something injected into your bladder. Typically, it's got something like lidocaine, some kind of pain relief, to take, some of that constant burning, some of that constant need to pee away. A lot of times, even women with IC, so even women with interstitial cystitis, will at some point chase embedded infections, especially when symptoms get really bad. And the thing with embedded infections is you're always going to find something with an embedded infection. I mean, that's just how it is. The bladder, contrary to popular belief, is not a sterile environment. It is an opening to the world, just like your gut has a microbiome. It turns out your bladder does too. Now, the difference is we want good bacteria, just like in our gut. We want good bacteria to reside in our bladder, just like we want good bacteria to reside in our gut. And we don't want those pathogenic bacteria to be there. However, my belief is when you're looking for pathogenic bacteria at such a small, like at such low levels, the problem isn't with an infection. The problem is with the root of the matter, which is always, always metabolic distress due to imbalance in one of the hormones that make you tick: thyroid, insulin, cortisol, or some combination thereof. Now, one more thing, because in case you're thinking, but you know what? The weird thing is, when I'm on antibiotics, I actually do feel better. And I did too. And there's a reason for that. This is something that deserves its own video. I will say the short answer to that is antibiotics actually alter the way that your body metabolizes. And I'm going to leave it there for this video. This is something that we will dive deeper into. Okay, now circling back to my original thing before I went off on a tangent. So a lot of women distrust the fact that it really can be so easy as getting 14 daily emails about what your daily actions need to be, and like painting this picture of why you're struggling with this metabolic distress right now and how to actually support balance of thyroid, insulin, and cortisol. And I get that. For that reason, I am working on a brand new program specifically for IC. This one is called IC Relief. In this one, this is kind of like UTI Freedom Formula on steroids, whereas UTI Freedom Formula is 14 days. IC Relief is, quite frankly, I haven't decided yet. I believe it's going to be 21 days. It takes 21 days to build a habit. It may wind up being 28 days. It takes 21 days to build a habit. With interstitial cystitis, kind of the difference is lots of times women have been living for this with this condition, with this diagnosis for a lot longer than women who are struggling with chronic UTI. So this means if you're a woman who is struggling with chronic UTI and you've been doing that for like 2 or 3 years, people with interstitial cystitis have been doing it for like a decade plus. So that is a really long time to amp up the nervous system. That is a really long time to kind of dysregulate the bladder-brain connection. And so what we actually spend quite a bit of time doing, this is why I believe it's going to be 28 days instead of 21 days in IC Relief, is spend quite a bit of time on rebuilding that bladder-brain connection and in down regulating the nervous system, because that is definitely a component at some point. And this down regulation of the nervous system, this goes a long way with supporting healthy cortisol regulation in the body. So, you're still working on the hormones that make you tick, still working on your metabolism. We're just doing it in an indirect way, doing it more so by nervous system regulation, which is something above and beyond what is offered in the UTI Freedom Formula. Additionally, whereas UTI Freedom Formula seriously is, here's your daily email, here's your daily email, here's your daily email. IC Relief is a lot more of these really short videos for you to watch each day. Difference in delivery is kind of like choose how you want to take in this information. The other piece of it as well is we spend a lot more time talking about the diet aspect. And here, I mean, high and low glycemic index foods. So it's kind of it's more in depth. It's a little bit more, for kind of lack of a better word, like a little bit more hand holding. I hate to use that term because I feel like so many women with IC, they're already super savvy anyways, but it's a little bit more of a being held guided experience. And there is something to that as well, just this support, like this feeling of support, like that so many of us who are struggling with chronic UTI, who are struggling with interstitial cystitis really need, is this feeling of support. So there's a lot more to that as well. I think, me showing up for you in a video format where you can actually like see my face, whether or not it's real time. There's so much more to that. And whereas UTI Freedom Formula, there's one one-on-one coaching call at the end of it. Beyond UTI, this is where we talk about any residual symptoms that are still going on. Typically for women at this point, it's like a little bit of urinary urgency still lingering, where we just need to work on that bladder-brain connection a little bit more for women suffering from chronic UTI. In IC Relief, it will be one-on-one and probably something else, whether that's a second or third one-on-one, which I'm kind of, seriously thinking about offering one-on-one call at day 14 and then again at day 28. Or whether that is maybe more like a group call. So still debating, still pondering that. If you have thoughts on that or wishes on that as I'm putting together this program, reach out to me at she'sbalanced@gmail.com or at hey@rainartdata.com. Either one of those will find me. All right. With that, if you have any questions at all, the other thing, if you're thinking that, UTI, you have IC, and I've kind of talked you into trying UTI Freedom Formula because it's available right now. If you opt into that program and then you move through it and you're like, well, I think I want IC relief. The price that you pay for UTI Freedom Formula, which is $240 program, I'll apply it to IC relief. So you'll get $240 off the program price for IC relief if you go ahead and sign up for UTI Freedom Formula. And this is available like even after IC relief is available. If you're like, well, I think I can get what I need from UTI Freedom Formula, go for it. And then after moving through it, if you're like, no, I'm still struggling, I want to upgrade to IC relief, that's totally fine. You'll have that option too. And I'll offer credit for the UTI Freedom Formula to IC relief. Have any questions on that, reach out to me. Once again, she'sbalanced@gmail.com or hey@rainartdata.com. All right. Thanks for being here. Bye.